Hello, I'm Ozzie, and this is Religion and Life. Well, obviously today we're not in our beautiful App TV studios. Appalachian State University has encouraged all non-essential faculty and staff to work remotely. So the studio is closed due to the coronavirus pandemic and the effects it's had on our community and university. And we're still committed to bringing new content, however. So we're going to try to conduct an interview today remotely, and hope that will go well. Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic has impacted more than our university. Families and communities, workers and businesses have all been impacted. And perhaps we don't think about it so much, but faith communities have also been greatly impacted by state, local, and national guidelines for dealing with coronavirus. So to talk about that today, I have two guests, two local ministers from Boone United Methodist Church, the Reverend Lory Huffman, Lory Beth Huffman, who is senior minister at Boone United Methodist Church, and Reverend Vern Collins, who is minister of Discipleship. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
The names and titles correct there. So thank you to both for joining us to talk about this issue today. And I'd like to just start, perhaps, Lory Beth, with you. Obviously, there are a lot of recommendations, national guidelines, state guidelines, and community guidelines, and some are more restrictive than others. I'm just wondering how you're working to incorporate all of these guidelines and how you're interpreting them for your church.
Sure. So our staff, we meet weekly on Mondays to kind of prepare for, all right, how do we do ministry this week? And particularly a couple of weeks ago, as things were changing so quickly, what I continued to share with folks is the two voices that will help guide our decision-making are, first of all, our bishop for the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and the governor of North Carolina, that those were the two entities that had jurisdiction and rule over how we needed to be behaving and doing and acting here in Boone. And so that has been helpful to be clear about who we were listening to in order to make decisions early on. And that's worked for us, and they've provided excellent guidance, I think, for us along the way.
Well, as I interpret both the governor's stay-at-home directive and the directives you're getting from the bishop, I mean, it's virtually impossible right now to hold worship services. Is that correct?
It's impossible to hold worship services with people present in the sanctuary.
Okay,
but
right.
We've discovered that we have been able to hold worship, just doing it with live stream and Facebook Live. But yes, with actually the governor's orders were 50 people or less, but the CDC was 10 or less. And so it just the populations that we serve, many folks fall into the high risk categories that early on we decided we needed to be creative.
Right. Yes. Well, Boone United Methodist is a fairly large church. So you'd have several hundred normally spread out over 2 or 3 worship services. And Vern, I know the worship service that you lead in particular in the Family Life Center generally serves a lot of college students, I think, among others. But those folks aren't even here now. Are you able to reach out to them wherever they might be scattered across the state and country?
Yeah, we have been. And like Lory Beth said, we have found that social media has been an incredible tool. And one of the I think surprising things that we found is that it has allowed us to connect with former students, people who have left and have gone to other places. And we constantly hear from folks that they're having a hard time finding a church like Boone United Methodist, and they miss it a whole lot. And so I think not only have we been able to connect with our current congregation and folks who join us for worship across our 3 services, but we've also found that it's allowed us to connect with folks that that maybe have missed being a part of this worshiping community. So we're grateful for that.
I watched one of the worship services that the two of you did together, actually, and it was a creative use of technology and your talents. So maybe you could describe for our audience kind of what you're doing in order to bring a worship service to the community remotely. You're sitting in an empty sanctuary. Just how does that work? And has it worked well for you?
Yeah, I'll start, and then Vern can definitely fill in the gaps for us. But that, the first notice came on Thursday that our bishop is the one who said no gathering for communal worship. And so we had from Thursday afternoon until Sunday to get this figured out the very first week. And every week we have learned something new and are continuing to improve our process. But we figured out our team that could work on this and got a plan in place to share responsibility. It's kind of funny because on Sunday, I might be running the camera part of the time while our musicians are singing, and then one of the musicians will run the camera while we're preaching. We've got folks that are multitasking and learning jobs that they've never had to do before, and it's great. It's such a team spirit. But Vern and I have enjoyed being able to work together because we normally are preaching in two different settings simultaneously. And so it's been nice to be able to share responsibility and team preach, which we do a couple of times a year, but this has been kind of fun. And to tap some of our musicians and folks to be able to come and lead worship in a very relaxed, sort of beautiful setting with the other interesting dynamic or people are able to respond on Facebook Live. And so some of our staff and pastors are monitoring the responses. So they're providing care and attention to folks that are reacting live, real time. And so for me, it's been a wonderful, fun chance to work as a team to worship in ways that have surpassed my expectations of how connected I've felt to our church family, and as Vern said, way beyond. But Vern, you can add to the thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'd love to just begin by saying I think it was really helpful for us. I'm glad that you started with this, Lory, Beth, that we didn't have to do the hard work of making the decision, as a church. That decision was made for us, and so it gave us an opportunity to then do the work of considering how we, are going to respond. And that first Sunday, I think it was just let's scramble and figure out how to patch something together, and it turned out to be a really beautiful thing. I was already scheduled to be off that Sunday. I believe it was the 15th, and so I got to be at home with my family and to watch the worship service and interact with folks online. And I was amazed at just the way, even sitting at home, we felt the presence of the Holy Spirit and felt like we truly were connected. But we have had, one of our staff in particular has worked so hard, excuse me, each week to wrestle with how can we improve that experience for folks. The first Sunday we were solely on Facebook and Instagram, and have been able to expand beyond that to YouTube. And this past couple of Sundays, we were on the radio as well. So it's really been, rather than just kind of resting on what we know works, we want to make sure that we're trying to reach as many folks as possible. Because I think that mirrors who we already are as a church. The reason we offer 3 distinctly different worship gatherings is because we realize it provides an opportunity for us to connect with folks in a setting that may be more comfortable for them. And so I've really been grateful that we've been able to go beyond just the social media into other avenues of connection and putting this service and the word out there.
Yeah, I want to return to your comment, Vern, about reaching out to as many people as possible in just a moment. But I'm just curious about the how you guys feel taping a service like that. I know there's I've tried taping lectures for my classes, for example, and there's a performative aspect to that that's missing when you don't have an audience. Is that odd to you to be sitting in an empty sanctuary? Are you imagining there are people there, or how do you deal with that kind of dynamic?
Yeah, I'd like to start on this one because it's very different for me. The folks that tend to worship in Crossroads, they tend to be responsive. And so, there might be, clapping in response to a worship song. Folks certainly will respond during my preaching. And so it's been very different for me to preach to an empty room. But at the same time, I think has been a really beautiful challenge. And so, when we strip everything away, what do we hope the Word of God accomplishes? Because I think it's easy to kind of play to, a room full of people as opposed to just offer, what God has given us and trust that God is going to, accomplish what God wants to with it. But it has been, I've had to focus on not wandering, allowing my eyes to wander around the room, which I would normally do, and kind of gauge and see who's in there, and just focusing on the camera has been difficult. And I've been grateful that there have been other people in the room, and it hasn't just been, me in there by myself. And I've loved getting to, as Lory Beth said, I've loved getting to work alongside her as well.
Right.
Yeah, and Ozzie, one of the choices we made early on is, as long as they would allow us, and it looks like since we are considered an essential service, we can, that it was important for us to have at least a couple of people in the room so we would have energy with one another versus recording each individual part. And even there's a dynamic when you're doing it Facebook Live and people are commenting, it still feels different than if you were just doing a recording that would be shown later. So that's one of the things that has surprised me, is I still have felt connected to people and feel like, oh, we are gathering at this point in time to worship God. So even though they're not in the sanctuary with me, I've felt their presence. And that to me has helped so much with the energy level and the inspiration and the passion of what we're doing and the message we're communicating, because I felt connected to people. And that was a choice we made early on to try and offer our worship in this way.
There's one thing that occurred to me. Boone United is a fairly large church with resources, technology resources that help you to put these programs together. I would imagine that there are smaller churches in the community, perhaps without those resources, that might struggle offering online worship services. So that's one sort of access problem. And the other might be that I would guess that many of the senior members of our church communities might not have either the same technological resources or prowess in order to be able to connect in the ways that you're trying to connect now. Has that been an issue in the community with smaller churches, or even within Boone United, reaching everyone?
The challenge, well, the beauty is right now, truly, all you need to offer Facebook Live is a cell phone, internet connection, and a Facebook account. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of churches have been able to offer some kind of worship, but up here in the high country and in rural areas, the internet access is a challenge. And so that has been difficult for some folks to overcome. But our older folks, I am super proud of them. They have taken on learning how to Zoom. They have taken on learning how to Facebook Live and discover the YouTube channel. And so many of our folks are exploring technology in ways that they might not have been as motivated to learn before. But we are grateful that we have the opportunity to be on the radio, because we do have some folks that just either can't or they don't have the equipment to access it, and the radio is more user friendly for folks.
Well, what about in the ritual life of the church and other religions as well? Many of our rituals are fairly intimate, serving communion or offering baptism. I don't know if you've had to deal with any of this yet, but I would imagine that when it comes to rituals like communion, baptism, weddings, officiating at funerals, all of these things either require pretty intimate contact or are sometimes accompanied by fairly large crowds. how do you deal with those sorts of challenges? Or have you had to so far? We're still fairly early into this, I guess.
So our church has not had any funerals yet. And folks are just having to make some decisions around that. A lot of folks in other churches are just delaying a family gathering. And so we just have to work with individual situations. The weddings are the same. Vern, I think you have a wedding. I have a wedding in June, and I'm working with the couple as we figure out, all right, what are we going to do? It may end up being as small a gathering as the minimum of 5 people, the couple, 2 witnesses, the pastor, and then they'll do a celebration later. Vern, I don't know if that's the same thing for you for weddings.
Yeah, the couple that I'm currently counseling, we have gone ahead and begun the discussion of making a contingency plan, and thankfully theirs isn't until a little bit later, toward the end of the summer, but it has, we have had that conversation.
Right. Baptisms, that has not come up yet, and I would just recommend the family waiting, or the individual to just wait and let us celebrate that in a beautiful way when we can be all together. And so communion is coming up for us, and next
Easter
week,
Sunday, right?
right.
Yeah.
Well, and with Holy Week next week, what we've decided to do is we will celebrate communion on Thursday and then again on Easter Sunday. But we were waiting for some direction from the bishop because in the United Methodist Church, before this was not allowed. It's like, okay, how are we going to do this with people in their homes? And
Right.
they have given us permission to be able to celebrate communion through live streaming, so that folks will be able to have their own elements, their own bread, their own juice. And as we bless the elements, we'll invite them to repeat the words. And so they'll be able to bless the elements in front of them. And as a family or individuals, they'll be able to serve communion. But Vern and I were laughing about this as we were waiting for a decision, because we were feeling a great deal of stress of, please let this go the way we want it to go, so we don't get caught in a situation of figuring out, okay, how can we celebrate this creatively and still honor that it is a holy sacrament. Thankfully, we do not have to ask permission, right, Vern? We figured it out.
That's right.
Well, I think the Pope has made some concessions about celebration of Mass within the Roman Catholic Church. I hope to explore that in a later program. So this has forced ecclesiastical leaders to think differently about the way we do things. And I see it's not different in the Methodist Church. Mm-hmm. Another concern that occurred to me is that, I mean, we've talked about the ritual life of the church, the worship life of the church, but the church also has a real heavy pastoral care element to it. And I know you there at Boone Methodist have a minister of pastoral care who's not with us today, but I'm wondering if maybe families that are on the edge with things like food insecurity, or perhaps they're working on relationships within the family structure, the added stress of all this must be upping the anxiety levels among your parishioners. And I'm wondering if you've begun to talk about the possibility that more and more people will be in bad situations, isolated as they are from their community. Do you anticipate a rise in domestic violence, for example, or other issues that might arise?
I think one of the things that we have tried to do, and again, you alluded to this earlier in terms of the way we are resourced as a church, because we are a larger church, but this is where being a part of a larger staff has also really been a gift and a blessing. And one of the things that we each week try to spend time in our staff meeting talking about is, who are we connecting with? What are the needs that we are becoming aware of? But it has also given us an opportunity to really lean on our lay leadership and the connections that they have with folks, because it would be unrealistic to think that in the same way that our pastoral care pastor, the way he is used to being able to care for people, it's impossible to do the way that things are, because everybody needs some degree of care right now. And so it's less, trying to put out fires and more trying to be aware of, where those tensions and where those needs might arise, and making sure that it's, we are leaning on that lay leadership, and helping them know that they have the ability to be a pastoral and a caring presence in the lives of people that we might not be as connected to as staff. And so we found that just the simple act of picking up the phone and calling somebody that you may normally just shoot a text to, but actually having, hearing a voice on the other end has been a real blessing to folks. But it's also allowed us to ask the question, hey, how are you right now? Are there some needs that we as a church can, come alongside you in? Are there ways that we can help, fill in the gaps, whether it's with food or whatever? And so it's been neat to watch the way that the church as a body is beginning to operate in that way.
I will add to that particularly in the last week, as I have been connecting with church leaders and even the staff, there is a stress level that's starting to grow as people adapt to this new reality and realize, oh, this is not just a 2-week thing. This might be more than a month kind of thing. And I've particularly held in my heart some of our church members that are community leaders that a couple have shared with me, they feel the weight of the responsibility of some of the decisions that they have to make, and how that affects small business owners and employees and people who depend on them for their income and their, life security. And there's just a weightiness right now for some folks that I just feel burdened to continue to hold in prayer, because these are hard times for everybody at so many levels. And this is a really important question that you ask, because there's a need for us to care for one another, and the mental and emotional health of this will be harder and harder the more into this we go, and helping folks have a place to share that and to vent or to just be cared for becomes even more important.
That's really well said. And I know that these times are really calling on you guys to be more adaptable to a rapidly changing situation. And that being said, I'm wondering if there's a sense in which you feel that maybe even temporarily the priorities of the church have been impacted or changed or are changing. Maybe not specifically your local church, but the church in a broader sense. Is there a sense that priorities have to change, have to shift, if not forever, at least temporarily?
Absolutely. Just like in our own personal lives, our priorities have changed. The same thing is happening in the church with a capital C, and particularly for us in the United Methodist Church. Everything has been postponed. So this was a year where our denomination was going to deal once again with questions around human sexuality, but also it was our general conference that would normally be held in May that sets budget for 4 years, that handles the business of the church, is all been postponed. And so we're going to enter into a new territory where we've got to come up with rules and adaptations of how do we even function for the next year, because the normal decision-making process isn't happening, and nor should it happen. But it also has allowed us to re-message and focus on some other things, which honestly has been kind of nice to be able to set some stuff aside. And I know, and Vern, you can pick this up, but personally at our own church, this year was a year we were really trying to emphasize discipleship, transforming discipleship. And I think we have a unique opportunity to continue to focus on that, even though it's in ways we might not have been expecting to.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. I think that for me, as I've thought about the priorities of the church, the priority of the church, I feel like is more highlighted now than ever. And that is, how are we being the hands and feet of Christ, not just for obviously our own members and those who call this their church home, but for the community and for the world at large. How is the church, while all this has leveled the playing field. I mean, this is the common denominator. All of us are affected by it. In the midst of that, how are we offering hope and speaking hope into that? And I do think that it has given us opportunity to question, man, how we tend to spend a lot of time doing things that maybe we could do much more efficiently, or maybe just not do, because I think it's, again, when you kind of strip some of that stuff away and you realize at its core, what does the church exist for? And then as far as that, the considering what does it mean to be a disciple and to be about making disciples, discipleship is really tested when we walk through trying times. It's easy to say my relationship with God is healthy when things are good, right? I'm growing, I'm thriving. But the moment that things become difficult, that's when we really, one, begin to consider who do we really know God to be and trust God to be? And two, how are we walking alongside one another in this? And so it really has given us some opportunity to invite folks to consider both of those things.
Well, I really do appreciate both of you coming on today in this odd kind of format. And it's really nice to hear about the ongoing work that you're doing in the community. And I know there are other faith communities out there who are struggling and with challenging times and are working just as hard. But thank you so much for the presence you've had in our community and for spending time with us today. And that's it for today's broadcast of Religion and Life. I hope you'll join us next week on App TV. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwald.